It began with a light that no one saw. In the vast silence of space, 642,000 light-years from Earth, a star collapsed in on itself and exploded, so violently that its death cry sent tremors through space-time itself. Telescopes missed it. Satellites blinked, but didn't register it. No warning. No flash in the sky. Just silence. But Earth felt it. Not in the atmosphere. Not in the oceans or the crust. It struck the mind. 3 days after the supernova, a man in rural Chile walked out of his house at 3 a.m., stood barefoot on the edge of a cliff, and whispered, "It's already burning." Then he leapt. 2 days later, a girl in Sweden collapsed during a piano recital. She didn't faint, she screamed. A full-throated wail, primal and terrified. When her parents ran to her side, she clawed at their faces, yelling in a language she had never spoken. A language no one had. The hospital called it a seizure. But the cameras showed her eyes had rolled back in sync with solar magnetic activity on the far side of the sun. Hours later, the same magnetic surge was measured hitting Mars. In NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Lab, tucked beneath a mountain in Colorado, the alerts came in differently. Not from sensors, from people. Dr. Amina Rourke was the first to notice the pattern. A routine incident log had flagged 7 separate civilian reports over the course of 48 hours. No connection, no shared geography, until she noticed the timestamps. All 7 occurred precisely 11 minutes after Earth passed through a faint wave of cosmic radiation. A radiation signature they had no record of. Background levels spiked for just under 6 seconds. Invisible, harmless, nothing a human body should even register. Yet the reports were undeniable. Hallucinations, screaming, prophetic speech, acts of madness that seemed coordinated. She opened a case file. Unofficial. Internal only. She titled it Event Echo 7. Then she started listening. To the recordings. To the interviews. And soon to the pattern. It was a child in Morocco who gave the first direct clue. 6 years old. Quiet. Never spoken a word in his life. His parents thought he was mute. Then, after the event, he stood in the middle of their courtyard and whispered a sentence so clear it cut through the wind. The moon is going to crack, not fall, not shatter, just crack. A week later, seismic monitors on the lunar surface picked up a tremor in the basalt plain of Mare Imbrium, deep, unnatural, and sharp. A fissure, hundreds of meters long, formed beneath the surface without explanation. NASA didn't announce it. The report was buried. But Rourke saw it. She called the Pentagon. They told her to forget it. So she didn't. She kept listening. And that's when the voices began to repeat. Different people. Same sentences. Spoken in the same flat tone. The sky will bleed at 7:13. She will scream through the static. The oceans remember the fire. Each line was recorded on different days. Different continents. And yet, when Rourke lined up the audio files, they aligned perfectly in rhythm. Something was syncing these moments. Something outside of time. By the time the 12th voice was recorded, Rourke noticed something else. They were all describing the future. Not vague dreams. Not psychic guesswork. Events. Precise, terrifying events. A man in Texas described a train derailment. 12 casualties. 3 survivors. Names even. It was dismissed. A week later, the incident occurred. Every detail matched. Another woman in Croatia screamed about a tower of smoke rising from under the sea. The next day, a previously unknown volcano erupted beneath the Pacific, forming a plume that registered on satellite before being swallowed by the ocean again. It wasn't just the radiation. It wasn't just brain chemistry. It was as if the supernova had burned through time, sending not just light or gravity, but information. The event waves kept coming, each one weaker than the last, but sharper, more focused. People were changing. They reported not just visions, but memories of things that hadn't happened yet. They felt sorrow for tragedies not yet born. They mourned loved ones who were still alive. One woman claimed she remembered holding her daughter's hand as the city burned, while the girl was standing right next to her. Another man described feeling joy from an event 30 years in the future, a cure for something we haven't yet named. But even those moments of hope were swallowed by the same echo. It ends in light and silence. Governments started paying attention when one of the affected individuals, an elderly priest in Naples, began writing in languages lost to history. Sumerian, Enochian, one script that didn't match anything. His writing translated, roughly, to, "You are witnessing a message from the ash of the stars. This is not prophecy. This is memory sent backward." The phrase repeated again and again. Then beneath it the same line, "Do not listen too long. Memory burns." Rourke's team had grown quiet, not out of fear, out of knowing. They had started to experience it too. Dreams that weren't dreams. A smell of smoke in rooms with no fire. A low-frequency hum that triggered nosebleeds and sudden tears. And above all, the glimpses. Rourke's first came while staring at her reflection. It blinked before she did, and whispered, "You die in the fire." And then the light came, not from the sky, from inside. A sudden flash behind her eyelids. A memory that didn't belong. A funeral. Hers. The coffin was sealed. No one looked inside, but she was still alive when they buried her. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, the dead star whispered again. They called themselves the Remembered. No public announcement. No social media. No manifesto. Just envelopes. Sealed in wax. No return address. Delivered by hand. Each letter began with the same phrase. "We have seen this before." Some were delivered to government agencies, others to obscure observatories, others to lone individuals who had never spoken about their visions. The contents varied, but the signature never changed. A symbol burned into the parchment, a spiral of stars coiled around a black sun. Rourke received hers on a Sunday morning. No knock, no camera footage of the delivery, just a soft tapping, as if the envelope had placed itself against her front door. Inside, coordinates. And a time. Nothing else. She thought it was a joke, until she cross-checked the location. It was a forgotten Soviet-era observatory buried deep in the Ural Mountains, decommissioned since 1989, sealed by landslides and radiation warnings after a failed nuclear experiment in the valley below. But recent satellite images showed something unexpected. Heat signatures, fresh tire tracks, and a pulse, barely visible in infrared. Something was active there. She booked a private flight, left without telling her team. The closer she got, the stranger it felt. Rourke had seen weird anomalies before, freak weather, misbehaving compasses, static bursts in her earpiece. But this was different. The atmosphere felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting for something. And then she reached the gate. It wasn't locked, just open, as if whoever ran this place didn't fear discovery anymore. Or maybe they wanted to be found. Inside, she found machines she didn't recognize. Old Soviet tech merged with quantum cores and materials far beyond Earth's documented inventory. Alloyed metals that shimmered like water, but were harder than steel. Antennas tuned not to radio or microwave frequencies, but to gravitational shifts. They were listening to the stars. Not for sound, for memories. The man who greeted her wore no name tag, no insignia. Just a plain coat, silver hair, and eyes like polished stone. He introduced himself as Dmitri. Said he'd been waiting for her. He told her they had been watching the supernova long before it ever exploded. They'd seen it thousands of years ago, not with telescopes, but with records passed down from civilizations that no longer exist. Ancient star maps. Temples aligned with a region of sky once called the Eye Beyond. He spoke of scrolls found beneath the ice in Antarctica. Glyphs matching the ones drawn in volcanic ash near Easter Island. All pointing to the same star. And a warning. When it dies, time will bleed. Rourke didn't believe him. Not at first. Until he took her into the observatory's lowest chamber. There, built into the floor, was something that should not have existed. A sphere the size of a car, suspended in midair, spinning silently. It wasn't floating. It was unmoving, while the world spun around it.
as if it existed outside of time.
Her instruments wouldn't register it. Light didn't reflect off it, but her body reacted. Her skin tingled. Her heartbeat skipped. Her thoughts began to echo in her own head, looping back before they were complete. She asked Dmitri what it was. His answer chilled her. We don't know, but it appeared the moment the first wave hit Earth. He called it the memory core, a vessel, he claimed, created by something far beyond our understanding, perhaps seated in the Earth long ago, dormant until the right event occurred. The supernova was a trigger,
A key.
the moment it exploded, this object activated. As if receiving a signal that spanned more than space, it spanned ages. He believed it was here to preserve something, but not from the past, from the future. Dmitri showed her their research, paper journals, never digitized, handwritten by generations of scientists and seers who claimed to have touched the sphere and seen glimpses of what was to come. Not just visions, whole lives, memories that were not theirs. One account spoke of a city in Africa swallowed by glass winds. Another described oceans rising to the height of skyscrapers, not from climate, but from a force pulling Earth upward towards something unnatural. And one page, torn and burned, simply read, "We broke the loop. We shouldn't have." Rourke left shaken. Back at her lab, she replayed the data from the past week's incident reports. More and more people were coming forward, whispers of the same disasters, the same phrases. It wasn't madness. It was synchronization. Humanity was becoming tuned to the memory stream. And something terrifying occurred to her. What if these weren't warnings? What if they were reminders? Her sleep became restless. She saw cities on fire, skies filled with static, people screaming not in pain, but in recognition, as if they'd seen it all before. And as the next wave from the supernova approached, its radiation already 3.2 light-hours away, Rourke made one final discovery. The frequency of the pulses matched a pattern, a rhythm, binary code. When translated, it revealed a message, not in English, but in her own voice, saying, "This is your last chance to forget." The third wave hit at midnight. It wasn't detected by satellites. No gamma burst, no gravitational ripple, but people felt it. Across time zones, strangers jolted awake at the same instant. Many cried out, some convulsed. Others stood still in their kitchens, on staircases, in train stations, motionless, eyes wide, locked in silent communion with something only they could see. Hospitals called it mass seizure disorder. Governments suspected a bioweapon. But Rourke knew the truth. These weren't symptoms. They were downloads. In Argentina, a shepherd drew a map of a city that hadn't been built yet, complete with names, streets, blueprints. In Kyoto, a child described a virus that would target only those who had experienced love. And in Nairobi, a blind man carved a spiral pattern into a tree trunk, identical to the one Rourke had seen etched into the memory sphere back in the Ural Observatory. Each event happened simultaneously, and each person claimed the same thing. I was there. I remember, but it hasn't happened yet. The memory core had triggered something global. The supernova's waves weren't merely radiation. They were instructions, seeds of potential futures broadcast across light years, now sprouting in human minds, unfolding as memories rather than prophecies. But there was a catch. The visions were not just warnings. They were invitations to repeat what had already happened somewhere else, or to change it. But change, Rourke realized, came with a price. The feedback began in small ways. Computers rebooting mid-sentence. Cameras recording footage that had already been seen. A weather balloon in Greenland capturing radio waves from 2091. An air traffic control tower receiving a distress call from a flight that would not take off for another 23 years. And then people started vanishing. Not all at once. And not everywhere. But in clusters. Whole classrooms emptied mid-lesson. Subway cars stopped between stations, doors sealed, and when reopened, the passengers were gone. Surveillance footage showed nothing unusual, just static, and a faint pulse. 11.1 hertz. Rourke returned to the observatory. But this time, Dmitri was gone. In his place was a recording, scrambled, looping endlessly on a cracked CRT monitor in the deepest chamber. "We went too far. The future isn't ours. They're trying to put it back." In the background of the tape, behind his broken voice, she heard a sound.
Wind? No.
Breathing. Not human. Slow. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Like something alive but manufactured. She turned to the memory core.
It had changed.
It was no longer a sphere. Now it pulsed like a beating heart, its shape shifting subtly with each throb, displaying flickers of cities, faces, stars, and void. Each flicker showed her own reflection. Older.
Scarred.
Sometimes burning. Always watching herself back. Rourke fled.
But the world outside had changed.
Time no longer moved in one direction. She passed a man on a highway who aged 10 years in 3 steps. A mother calling for her child as the stroller vanished before her eyes. Clock towers spiraled backward at dawn. Birds flew in loops they couldn't escape. Planes appeared frozen in the sky for hours before crashing to the ground. And no one could agree what day it was. Then came the synchrosphere events. That's what researchers named them. Moments where millions of people simultaneously entered trance states, staring at fixed points, whispering the same phrases in different languages. "We've already done this. Stop remembering it. Let go." The most terrifying part? Children were whispering it first. Rourke was no longer sure who to trust. Every country claimed it had a solution. China proposed erasing time-stamped memories using magnetic therapy. The US tried launching probes into the upper ionosphere to block further signals. Russia detonated a warhead over the Pacific, only to watch the blast reverse, mushroom cloud pulling itself back into the sky like a god inhaling. Nothing worked, because the memories weren't coming. They were already inside us. At the UN, a final summit was held. World leaders gathered under artificial light, deep underground, surrounded by analog equipment to avoid electronic contamination. Rourke was invited to speak. She stood before them and said, "You're looking for a virus. It's not a virus. It's not even a transmission. It's a mirror. This star didn't send us knowledge. It sent us our choices." But they didn't listen. They were too busy planning contingencies. Too busy arguing about which version of the future was real. They hadn't noticed the clock on the wall repeating the same 5 seconds for the last hour. And then the final wave came. It wasn't visible, not measured, not felt. But across the planet, everything paused. A breath held. For 1 second, the world stopped spinning. And in that moment, everyone saw something different. Their own death, their greatest joy, their most sacred failure, or their future self. But Rourke saw nothing. Only her own eyes, looking back at her from the center of the memory sphere, wide and hollow. And behind her, a hand, not touching her, but pointing. The sky cracked open at 2:14 a.m. Not visually, not in thunder, but in memory. All around the world, people began to remember things they hadn't lived. Some awoke, crying for children they never had. Others panicked over wars they never fought. A few whispered names they'd never spoken, but somehow loved deeply. Hospitals overflowed with those suffering false futures, memories of lives that hadn't yet occurred, but felt just as real as the present. And every one of them, without exception, ended the same way. A blinding light, a rising scream, and silence swallowing earth. Dr. Rourke stood before the memory core for the last time. It no longer shimmered or pulsed. It spun, silently, like a clock without hands. Inside its core, she saw fragments of what might come. Cities turned to glass, the moon cracked open, humanity reaching upward only to be pulled back down by something with 1,000 arms. But the worst vision wasn't the apocalypse. It was the loop, Earth, rising and falling. Different decades, different flags, same fate, again, and again, and again. Each time ending in light, each time triggered by the same star. The supernova was not an accident. It was a signal, a reset switch, activated when a civilization reached a certain level of noise, heat, interference, arrogance. We had grown too loud. And now we were being rewritten. Governments collapsed not through violence, but irrelevance. No one listened anymore. Not when they could hear the future whispering directly into their minds. Those with the strongest visions fled into the wilderness, forming communes where they buried clocks and burned anything with screens. They spoke in symbols. They painted spirals in ash. One commune in Mongolia vanished entirely, leaving behind a message carved into obsidian. We chose not to be remembered. The memory core gave one final pulse. A global blackout followed. Satellites fell from orbit like burning insects. Digital archives blinked out. And with them, names, histories, maps, meaning. Suddenly, the past was optional. So was the future. All that remained was the now. And even that frayed at the edges. Rourke returned to the sea, to the quiet. She stood on a black beach with sand like powdered glass, staring up at a sky that now bent in ways the mind could not hold. Stars danced differently now. Constellations shifted like ink on wet paper. And at the center of it all, the echo of the original star. The one that died so beautifully, just to remind us that nothing ends alone. The final vision came without warning. Not from the core, not from the sky, but from within. Her own heart stuttered. And for a moment, she was everyone. The child seeing his mother for the last time. The soldier stepping into nuclear light. The scientist opening the door that should have stayed shut. And she understood. This wasn't prophecy. It was déjà vu on a cosmic scale. The universe didn't predict the future. It remembered it. We were the echo of a civilization that had already burned. And in remembering it, we summoned it again. But Rourke saw one thing the others hadn't. One thread. In a future that had played 1,000 times, there was one path that had never been chosen. To forget. To let go of the need to know what comes next. To live without warning. To die without fear. And so, with trembling hands, she turned away from the core. And she closed her eyes. She walked into the ocean. Not to drown, but to quiet the echoes. One step at a time. Sand underfoot. Cold rising. Breath slowing. And as the waves closed over her, she whispered, "Let someone else write it this time." And the sea held her like a mother who had already lost too much. No record remains of what happened after that. The core is silent. The sky is still. Some say Earth blinked out of the galaxy for a full 7 seconds before reappearing slightly different.
Others say we were replaced, but most people no longer ask.
Because the visions have stopped, the whispers are gone, and the stars, finally, seem quiet again.
For now.